Welcome everyone to our third Volleyball BC Coach Development webinar. Tonight's presentation is going to be on observational learning presented by Michael Hawkins from the UBC Thunderbirds men's volleyball program. Before we get going tonight, just a couple housekeeping items. So we're presenting on the Zoom platform as well as YouTube Live. For those of you on the Zoom platform, we do have a panel discussion function where you can type in any comments you have, say hi to some other attendees. Seen a lot of familiar faces, so it's been really exciting to see the turnout so far. We also have the Q&A function where you can ask Mike any questions throughout the presentation. We have two scheduled breaks during the presentation that we're calling technical timeouts, where we'll be stopping to discuss any questions you may have and really engage the audience. So really encourage everyone to participate in that conversation and ask questions. For those who maybe have to take off a little bit early, or anyone you know who couldn't make the presentation, we will be archiving the footage on YouTube Live. So just go to the Volleyball BC channel and you can take a look there. Mike, I guess let's bring you online. Can you, yeah, come on, perfect. Yeah, are you good to go? Can we hear you?
Yeah, good to go, buddy.
Okay, take it away, Mike.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, hi everyone. And kind of before I get started with the presentation, I just want to say thank you to Jay and the rest of Volleyball BC for putting on this webinar series. I think, obviously with this COVID-19 situation, there's been a lot of unfortunate situations that have come from this, namely that the end of everyone's club season and even U Sports National is not happening. And I think one of the big losses from that, aside from the athletes not getting to compete, is just the loss of kind of like the informal PD that I'm sure we've all experienced, whether it's at club provincials, club nationals, and just getting the opportunity to talk to other coaches. So I think this webinar series is a really cool opportunity for all of us to kind of get into one virtual room, one platform, and have discussions on volleyball. And I think there's been a couple other platforms, a couple other groups that have done something similar. Like I know Dave Wildman, who was for sure on the first two calls. He's been doing the same thing with the Volleyball Coaches of Canada, and I know some other provincial organizations have done the same. I think it's a really fantastic opportunity for all of us to share information on volleyball. One thing that we told our guys kind of right from the jump here is that COVID-19 isn't an obstacle, it's an opportunity, and we just need to have the proper mindset and a creative mindset to overcome that. So with that in mind, we'll get started here. All right, so like Jay said, my name is Michael Hawkins. I'm the head coach of the UBC men's volleyball team. I just finished my second season at UBC. And today we're going to be talking about observational learning. It's motor skill development and applications to volleyball. Today, like as Jay had mentioned, there's going to be two different technical timeouts. We're going a little more international style with the breaks at 8 and 16 points. But really the presentation is going to be broken up into three parts. And, part one is going to be a lot more on theoretical background, a literature review. Part two is going to be more of its applications within season. It's kind of pairing the literature with kind of some practices that you can use within your season. And then the third part is going to be more examples that I've seen with Team Canada, the senior women's national team, and also what we've done with the UBC men's volleyball team during this quarantine period. So just a little bit about me. I feel like I'm a little bit of the unknown of this group. In one respect, kind of the new kid on the block. The funny thing is that I've kind of been on the block. If that's volleyball in BC. I've just been moving houses a lot, so I'm kind of the guy who's got an affinity with changing his mailing address. But my playing background started at Mount Royal College. It's now Mount Royal University, but played for Sean Sky at Mount Royal College. Went back home to Lethbridge, where I'm born and raised, and then finished off my playing career at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops. From there, I was really fortunate that Pat Henley gave me the opportunity to assistant coach him for 2 years. And then that kind of kickstarted my wild ride for a couple of years. So then I moved back home to Lethbridge to assistant coach under Ian Bennett, and then took over as head coach for a year. And then Pat Henley decided to take a little bit of a break, and I moved in as the interim head coach for another season. I got to join Brad Hudson at UBC Okanagan, and was really fortunate for that amazing opportunity. And then again, wanted to keep changing my mailing address, so super fortunate to have the opportunity to now be the head coach of the UBC men's team. On top of that, I've had the opportunity to coach with our youth national team. This, knock on wood, that we get the opportunity to play this summer would be my 6th year in a row. A fantastic training environment, competitive environment, getting to work with a lot of athletes that you guys as viewers probably coach, kind of the 16 to 18-year-olds that then move on to university. I think it's a really awesome age group to deal with. These athletes who are physically extremely talented and technically quite talented, but are really just starting kind of their long-term careers. On top of that, with provincial organizations, worked with Volleyball BC in kind of like regional tryouts and Baden Cup, and then also had 2 summers with Volleyball Alberta. For me, my coaching philosophy, I really look to blend both the scientific and humanistic approaches to coaching. Similar to what Charles had said last night, really look to be evidence-based in like everything that we do with UBC. And a big piece of that is going to be motor learning principles. So those are really like our guiding principles to how we do everything from individual training, team training, to even how we kind of go over our game plan. Next up is just kind of a little bit more of my background, my academic background. So working with social identity and team cohesion research. And then really when it comes to, training decisions or game decisions, everything's just going to be statistically driven. And really kind of why that's been important to me over the past couple of years is just like a necessity to be able to answer why, and is this the best way? I think throughout my entire life, I've been painfully stubborn, and I think that definitely translates to my coaching. I'm someone who's just always questioning if what we're doing is the best way to do it. And I know for me as a young coach, particularly when I was starting my head coaching, a lot of the systems, tactics, and philosophies that I would incorporate to my teams was like they were often just things that I had learned in symposiums or other different kind of avenues. And they weren't necessarily things that I fully believed in, or I didn't take things that were partially from a symposium and then kind of bend them to like the personnel or the type of team that I was coaching. And I think that's probably been my biggest area of development over the past couple of years is taking the ideas, the best practices that other people incorporate in their gym, and then looking to just kind of blend it with my own style, my own personality. I've also been extremely fortunate to work with incredible coaches over the past couple of years. So namely just with our UBC team, I feel like we have a group of rock stars with Ian Perry, who's got a background in sport psychology, Matt Kruger, who's got a background in motor learning, and then Kerry McDonald, who's the director of sports science with Volleyball Canada. I think from those 3, I've learned a lot. And then even coaches that I've worked with within the Canada West, different coaches with the youth national team, and people that I've been coached by. I think I've had a really phenomenal pathway, which is the people that I've been able to incorporate with. So now kind of getting into a bit of the meat and potatoes here. So just giving it a little bit more of a theoretical background behind observational learning. So really it's the learning through watching others perform, okay, or modeling their actions. The processes of observational learning really are derived from Albert Bandura's social learning theory. Fun fact that I learned about Bandura today, actually from Ian Perry. I was a UBC grad. So he grew up in kind of rural central Alberta, but did his undergrad at UBC. So that's a bit of a fun fact. And there really are 4 processes of observational learning. So the first one is attention. So you can't learn unless you're paying attention, obviously, to the stimulus in your environment. A lot of that's going to be based on the characteristics of the observer. so like their level of attentiveness, but also who they're observing, like the model that they're observing. Those characteristics are going to play into the efficiency and effectiveness of the observational learning. Second one is retention. So not only being able to recognize behavior or recognize actions, but being able to retain that. And a lot of that is going to be based on the observer's ability to code that information and store it. And, for, the context of this conversation really is like note taking, and then being able to couple like that perception into action, which we'll get into a little bit later. The third one is production. So you must be physically and intellectually capable of reproducing the modeled behavior. So again, I'll touch on this multiple times throughout today. Competency is key. So based on age, physical development, cognitive development, the competency of the observer is important when you're looking to, I guess, determine who is the expert that you're looking to model. So again, we'll go into some details with that a little bit later. And then finally is motivation. So observers will perform, act if they have motivation or the reason to do so. So if there's someone who truly believes that observational learning is going to help them become a better athlete, the more motivated they are, then the better and more efficient that this observational learning will be. So just kind of going into a bit of a lit review. So again, I gave Matt Kruger a bit of a shout out earlier. So Matt is one of our assistant coaches, and we did a similar activity with our UBC guys a couple weeks ago, which again, I'll kind of go into more detail near the end of this presentation. And rather than kind of paraphrase what Matt had written for our guys and for his kind of business with New Wave Volleyball, I'll just kind of read off what he has written about observational learning. So research has shown that observation-based learning engages similar information processing mechanisms as physical practice. In the brain, mirror neurons are similarly activated when both observing and practicing motor movements. This means that observing motor skills can positively benefit learning and skill acquisition. In addition, volleyball-specific studies have shown that observing motor skills followed by physically practicing the viewed skill is beneficial to learning process. Really, that's going to be kind of the basis for this entire presentation, is that those few sentences there from Kruger. In particular, the action observation network, which really the area of the brain that's responsible for motor skill learning, is activated in both physical and observational training. So I know Jay last night kind of gave the group a bit of a heads up on the chat. There'd be some technical timeouts coming up, but with the 2 timeouts, I've got a bit of a warning for you guys. So just a heads up, there's a technical timeout happening in 3 slides. So observational learning's transfer to perform skill is most effective when variable observations exercised. So really what this means is, for it to be most effective, you need to look at both like a novice and an expert. So part of the benefit of that is that when you're looking at a novice, obviously they're not going to be perfect in their skill execution, but as the observer, it'll allow you to be a little bit more aware of error detection. When you're looking to model the expert, the frequency of errors is likely going to be a little bit lower, but being able to observe the novice and then observe the expert will allow you to just have more efficient processes for error detection. And like I had mentioned earlier, like that perceived competency is key. So the differences between the novice and the expert really should not be too high or too low. So one thing with this presentation that I'm really trying to be cognizant of is the fact that there's coaches who are coaching a wide range of athletes. So there could be some coaches here that are provincial team, university, college coaches, and then there's also going to be a group of coaches that are U12 or Atomic or U14, like coaching athletes who are really just getting into the sport. What you need to make sure that you're advising your athletes on is understanding that balance between skill level and task difficulty. So I'll just kind of jump to the diagram on the bottom. It's the spectrum between the two, and we're looking to engage that flow state. So really like where that relationship between your skill level and that task difficulty is kind of equal. If your skill level is very high and the task difficulty is low, there's going to be boredom, and kind of the inverse. If the difficulty is far too high and your skill level is far too low, then there's just going to be anxiety and likely confusion when they're looking to model that behavior. as I have written kind of on the bottom there, observational learning is most effective when the information, so whether it's technical cues or the area of focus, is provided beforehand. So the effectiveness of combining both verbal and visual feedback to motor skill development. So research tells us that combining the two is going to be the most efficient process, and particular with this study in volleyball. So verbal visual feedback is most efficient in serving and serve-receive skill training. And that's based, that's compared to just verbal only or visual only. Observational learning accompanied by verbal feedback leads to improved skill acquisition and retention. Again, that was looked at a volleyball study, but wasn't specifically looking at serving or serve receiving. Just kind of like the last slide before our technical timeout here. To me, just some prerequisites that I think are important prior to engaging in observational learning, is going to be clear technical cues and principles. So again, this is something that was brought up for sure in Shane's presentation on night one when he was talking about team cohesion and respect, is that you have to be principles based, and that really applies to both like technical skills and kind of like the team culture that you're looking to build. So similar to what Shane had said on night one, the athletes need the blueprint before they can start construction. They don't know what they don't know. So us as coaches, like really what we're looking to do is provide them with that information. And to do so, you need to understand the difference between external cues and internal cues. So motor learning principles, have shown that external cues are the most efficient for developing motor skills. So external cues, really what you're looking to do is create analogies. So you're trying to make sure that your athlete, like their area of focus isn't directly on the body. So an internal cue, you're thinking like if you're talking about an arm swing, you're thinking like draw elbow back or snap the wrist. Like all of those are focusing on body parts. What we're looking to accomplish is to get more external from that. So for us, we just look to use analogies really in everything that we do. Sometimes they're sillier than others, just because we know that they're likely going to stick with guys. So again, using the arm swing as the skill, we talked to our guys about just creating a whip with the arm swing. So like they're going to understand what creating a whip is going to mean. Like we're going to kind of backtrack when we're presenting the information to them that, hey, creating the whip means that this is what your arm swing looks like. You're incorporating thoracic rotation to generate greater velocity in your arm swing. Like they'll have that information, but when we're providing the cues in practice, it's all about just those quick hitting external cues. I guess I had one more slide before the technical timeout. I cannot reiterate this. I cannot repeat it enough tonight. Athlete autonomy is everything, especially again when we're talking about motivation, attention, retention, and production around social learning theory. Athlete autonomy is going to be everything. So so much research out there that provides evidence that there's an increased buy-in and retention of information if the athlete is actively participating in decision making and learning processes. I think even just with I hate to use the term like kids these days, because I almost feel like I'm still like a kid these days. But I think because people just have information so readily available, whether it's through Google or just what they're able to pull up on their phone, like really at a moment's notice. I think athletes really enjoy just knowing the why. And if you're able to engage them in that process of explaining the why and even being a part of coming up with the why, then all of a sudden like they just buy in. Because they understand like, okay, that makes clear sense to me. Whereas in the past, maybe athletes were a little bit more, I don't want to say trusting in coaches in the sense that they don't trust their coaches now. But because the coach was seen a little bit more as like an authoritative position, there was really just that immediate like, coach says this, I'll follow through, and no questions asked. But again, because athletes have that information just so readily available, I think incorporating them in decision making is so vital. So first technical timeouts. I joked around with Jay earlier on today when we kind of did a walkthrough. I knew that I wanted to throw in a few pictures in this presentation, and figured, hey, technical timeout, I'll throw like a whistle in the presentation, and I just Googled whistle blowing, and the very first picture was Obama. So I figured it'd be too fun not to add him in. So with that, I'll kind of take a step back, and Jay, if we want to kind of get rolling on some questions, I'm all yours.
All right, thanks, Mike. Just started the poll function. So for those of you on Zoom, you can go ahead and vote for some questions you'd like Mike to answer here in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll start with some of the more popular ones. Couple ones that we've heard quite a bit here in terms of the Q&A was just around different skills and external cues that you guys maybe use in some of the gyms you're coaching in. So can you maybe walk us through some different cues you use for, let's say, attacking and what those look like?
Yeah, attacking, that's a good one to pick because we're going to make reference to it kind of right near the end of this presentation. So in particular, when we talk about like receive to attack patterning, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we just think of analogies that we know are going to be just different from what guys hear, different from like what they've usually been coached. So what we talk about with receive to attack patterning is based on the past situation. So whether they pass the ball, so if they pass the ball and they pass the ball high, or if they pass it low, and then if they're in a no pass situation, so one of their teammates passes, we just call them the different roadways. Again, Charles last night talked about that, the shuffle 5, shuffle 3, and there's the shuffle 1. I had used those actually previously, based on Vincent Pichet's Volleyball Canada video, but just never found like with teams that I coached that really stuck. I kept having to explain that they don't necessarily need to shuffle 5 times. So we started creating roadways. So, if you don't pass, we just call it the freeway. So the idea is that you get a little bit further outside, and it's going to be different based on every athlete, on the type of jumper they are, the type of speed that they're able to generate in their approach. And then we always talk about like exiting from the freeway. So what we'll explain a little bit later with one of our athletes is the idea of finishing inside. So we talk about like exiting the freeway or exiting the roadway, and then high pointing the ball inside. So again, they're usually pretty subjective or specific to our team and to our personnel, and we just look to find ways that we know things are going to stick with our athletes, and also cues that are easily repeatable and easily said in practice. So I don't want to give them a paragraph or 10 seconds to get throw out my cue. Usually it's just going to be like, hey, switch lanes, freeway, high point, things like that.
Awesome. So what are your thoughts on the first steps for skill acquisition at the younger levels? And so how would you suggest club coaches explain drills or not explain drills, explain skills when an athlete's first trying to learn how to attack? Because I'm assuming a 12-year-old won't really know how to create a freeway or how is that relevant for volleyball? They're
going to have absolutely no idea what's going on. Yeah, that's where, based on the skill level, the experience level that you're coaching, oftentimes you're just going to have to backtrack even more. So for me, I find that the most important part of coaching is all the work that's done before you get on court and before you really get into practice or into an activity. So are you able to provide enough background information that when you're in training, when you're in an activity, you can just give quick feedback and the athletes will have an awareness of what you're referring to. So, if I'm coaching, a 12-year-old athlete who's really this is their first exposure to volleyball, I'm likely going to have to provide some sort of, internal explanation of a skill, of a motor skill, of the movement that's involved. But then I'm always going to continue building into what will be the external cue that we make reference to in practice. So again, if we're talking about the arm swing, we're talking about the whip. If I just show up to a 12 or a U12 practice and I'm just just create a whip, they're probably going to be some of the most horrific arm swings, and we're going to be concerned that we're physically damaging these young athletes. But the work is going to need to be done prior to that to explain, when we say create the whip, what we're looking for is, leading with your elbow first, having a loose arm. I don't necessarily believe in snapping the wrist, but creating, a little bit more of a loose, almost like a noodle when you're swinging through. So again, you kind of need to backtrack and provide the information. I use the blueprint analogy. When you're dealing with younger athletes, the blueprint's just going to have to be a little bit more detailed.
Yeah. Awesome. And so when it comes to helping young athletes learn a skill and maybe using some observational learning or using some video to maybe demo or show athletes what they're doing, would you recommend showing them what it looks like at the highest level? Or would you show them something that's a little bit closer to what they're working towards? So maybe if it's a 14U athlete, you're showing a 16U athlete.
Yeah, that's an awesome question, and I'm sure one that's probably on the mind of a lot of people that are watching and coaching kind of that demographic, is that like you just need to understand that the scale, like the novice and expert scale, is going to be sliding based on, again, the skill and experience level. So if I'm coaching someone who's really just getting into volleyball, like similar to you had mentioned, like the expert might just be an 18U player. So if they, if they're an athlete in like the Thunder Club, and they're just getting in, it's like maybe they're just watching and they're observing the 18U, because to them, like, that's going to be an expert, because based on their skill level and like their perceived competency, if they're all of a sudden watching the senior women's national team, like there's just going to be like no way that they're able to replicate the actions of Akira Van Ryk or Jesse Niles, any of those athletes. But maybe if they look at an 18-year-old that's seen a little bit more as attainable, then again, they're just going to be able to perceive those actions and then replicate them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, awesome. Just a couple more here, Mike, before we get going.
Cool.
How are you convincing athletes that watching video or doing like video homework is even beneficial for them? Like how are you inspiring them to say, hey, this is going to help you become a better volleyball player?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two ways that we would go about that. So kind of like what I just mentioned about the athlete autonomy, just giving them like the explanation as to why we would be doing this sort of assignment or this sort of activity. So I would probably show them all of part one of this presentation and say, hey, there's significant amounts of research that show the effectiveness of observational learning and the fact that it activates similar like motor pathways that physical training does. And then even like having them talk to people who have been in their shoes before. So like one thing we're going to be doing with our team in the next couple of weeks here is talking to Blair Bands, libero from our senior men's team. And in talking to Blair, like what the pros do, I'd say more than anybody else, is they just watch video. They watch video of themselves. They watch video of other people playing in their positions, not necessarily from like a tactical game plan sense, but just understanding that the more that they watch, the better that they're going to be. And I think another really good example of this, actually, he's really accessible over social media, is Dustin Watton, who's the USA men's. He's one of their two liberos with Eric Shoji.
Yep.
But Watton is like a big proponent of watching video, and he says like that's really what changed his career after he graduated from Long Beach. Is that as he started his pro career, he couldn't just rely on his physical skills and what had kind of gotten him to that point, that he needed to understand like what made other liberos really successful. And now he has a ton of material that he releases either on his blog or through his Instagram that really just shows like the effectiveness of observational learning.
Okay, awesome, Mike. Well, I think that's enough for now. We'll continue on with your presentation.
Cool. So now kind of jumping into part two, and it's going to be a little bit more of the applying the research into like what would be your high school club or post-secondary season. So again, kind of beating the drum, autonomous learning is really going to be vital when you get into season. So one thing that I know I had to fight when I first started coaching and really like started buying into motor learning principles is fighting the urge to give verbal feedback like immediately after a skill is executed, and just like not allowing the athlete to come up with the answers themselves. So I'd say two shifts that I've made in my coaching career over the past couple of years is one, I wait before I give any sort of feedback or kind of jump to the next part before I ask any questions, because you need to allow the athlete time to process like what just occurred. So if we're going through serve receive reps, the second that one of our athletes creates executes a forearm pass, I can't be in his ear right away being like, hey, what happened? What did you see? Why did the ball like not go to its desired location? It's like the athlete needs time to like refer back to our cues, process what just happened and then come up with the answer themselves. So typically we will wait like 4 to 5 seconds before we ask that question. And like these three, honestly, it's probably like 90% of my coaching and practice is like, what did you see? Why did blank happen? So if you're passing, you know, why did the ball go straight up? Why did it go over the net? And then what cues will you have focus on next? So I think that's another big component of this is, you know, asking them what they saw, like what happened, but then making sure that their focus is present on the next rep. And really the role of the coach is the facilitator of learning. You're not the one just, you know, kind of word vomiting all the information that you know. It's like allow them to come to those conclusions themselves. You know, obviously I haven't been able to, I really would have liked to like present a picture of what our whiteboard looks in practice, but unfortunately I haven't had to write on a whiteboard since the end of February. But really like what we look to do is just prime the cues and principles during practice. So on our whiteboard, we'll kind of have different columns on, you know, what the activities are, what cues we're going to be working on, and then how they're going to seek feedback. So if we're using video feedback or, you know, different equipment in practice. So just kind of right from the jump, the athletes will know like what our practice objective is, what activities that we're going to be participating in, and then really like what cues and principles that they should be focusing on. Really by the end of the year, like most of the guys are pretty dialed with what those cues are, but it kind of just serves as a refresher, especially again, like in the post-secondary context. If one of our athletes is just coming from you know, electrical engineering class, you know, maybe their brain is a little bit melted and they're not going to remember exactly, you know, what roadway they should be on if they pass the ball low and are trying to pattern inside. So we just want to make sure that we're kind of priming those cues with them on our whiteboard, and we'll do the same kind of as we explain a drill. We don't just explain like how the drill is going to function, but also what cues to be aware of. And as I said earlier, like the objective of all of this is just to couple the perception into action. So what you see, the information that you gather, like those perceptual cognitive skills, directly into those motor skills. So really kind of getting down to different ways that you can execute observational learning just in practice is video feedback. Video feedback to me is so significantly important, and something that, again, over the past couple of years, I've tried to incorporate more and more into training. And again, like I want to be very aware that not everyone's going to have the resources of a university program. Like if you're coaching like a high school JV team, like you're probably not working with a couple TVs and some iPads, and you probably don't have a coaching staff that can set up all this for you. But I would say like just be creative in how you can execute video feedback. So when I first started using it, it was just an iPad on a tripod. So I would just, you know, it was just me coaching a club team. I would have an idea of, you know, let's say we're working on serving. I would just set up the iPad and like in a certain angle that would provide like a good perspective or vantage point for our athletes. And I would just set it onto a video delay and I would just let the athletes go. You know, and again, we would prime them on cues and principles, but their learning was going to be up to them. So based on their motivation levels, you know, how much they wanted to go and look at that video and how in tune they wanted to be to those cues, they would just kind of cycle around and watch that video delay. If you have the ability to kind of mirror that to like a TV, you know, using like Apple TV or even like Chromecast is another way that you can use it. You can change the perspective or like the vantage point of the video, so whether it's an iPad or a camera, and then you can make it a little bit more accessible to where your athletes are. So if we're wanting to shoot something from baseline view, we'll probably put the TVs kind of on like the sideline, so like where the bench would be, or like a coach would be, because then it's just like much more accessible for athletes. If you're coaching a high school JV team and you don't have like any resources, your cell phone can be your greatest assistant coach. So using apps like Coach's Eye, which I think is just absolutely fantastic, and you can use a free version or you can get the premium version. You'll kind of see in a few slides here, just the use of a cell phone in Coach's Eye is really like all you need when incorporating observational learning into practice. So again, the example, so we've got Ben Hooker here, who's one of our setters, and in this particular practice, we were just working on the 31 set. So he's got, you can't see him in these three kind of still photos, but he's got a middle kind of running a 31 pattern. And prior to this activity, we primed Ben on some of our cues that I know he needed to work on. So in particular, it was going to be in relation to his contact point and then his release. So he was given kind of two external cues to focus on. And then we're looking to incorporate that verbal visual feedback. So I'm sitting here with my phone. I've just got coach's eye kind of starting and stopping with every rep. What you don't see is that we also have an iPad, what would be like behind me a little bit more in the middle of the court, that's providing Ben with immediate feedback onto a TV that was kind of right beside the net post. So Ben, like after he performs the set, can just continue looking straight forward at the sideline and he'll get the vantage point of the baseline. But what I can do with coach's eye on my cell phone is I can take these videos and then really easily, and I hope this video is kind of clear for everybody. It's a slow motion video, so it's not just your Wi-Fi that's maybe a little shoddy, but we're able to use coach's eye and I can record this video and kind of go in slow-mo and back and forth. And like Ben and I will just have conversations, whether it's every 3 or 4 reps or, you know, even more than that, and just talk to him about like what he feels or what he sees, or, you know, asking him like what happened if he misses the set. And all I'm looking for is in relation to those cues. So if he misses a set based on his contact point, that's all I want him to say. So it's like, hey, Ben, what happened? Contact point is too low. Perfect. If he's unsure, then we'll probably slow things down and I'll try to tease out some more information. And, you know, if I think it's his contact point that it's too low, so the set is, you know, shooting through the attacking zone, like then we can have a little bit more of a dialogue there. But really what we're looking to do is just having like these quick hitter verbal visual feedback opportunities. So I missed that. Technical timeouts coming in 2 slides. So I guess I'll prime you guys on this. If you have the chance in either the Q&A box or the chat function, whether you want to provide some examples of how you have used observational learning, whether it's, you know, creative ways that you guys have set up iPads or used your phone, please share. Because as much as this is me providing information and I'm just kind of like a talking head on your computer screen tonight, I also want this to be a forum for us exchanging information. So if you have any examples, that would be fantastic. And then if you have any challenges, so kind of as I was referring to, if you're like a lone coach and you're dealing with, you know, 15, 16 kids, like explain some of the challenges and hopefully we can all kind of talk about them and hopefully provide some solutions. So again, if you just don't have the means, you don't have the resources to provide video feedback, peer observation is going to be just as useful, or it's going to be another opportunity for observational learning. So again, after being primed with cues and different principles, just have the athletes observe one another. So this can be done in like how you set up drill designs. But what I would want to emphasize is that you can't just say, hey, you know, we're doing some passing reps. Make sure to watch the person in front of you, because we can all attest to this, that, you know, young athletes in particular don't have the greatest attention spans. So, you know, they're probably talking about, you know, what they did to like that previous day at school. They're going to be talking about who knows what. So making sure that you're priming them on like very small areas that they should be focusing on. So again, if the cue that you're working on in serve receive is like angle out and like angle out early, like in the flight path, then just have them only focus on that. And then they can provide feedback to their peers. So again, using serve receive as the example, just make sure that they're standing like behind the model, like the person that they're observing, because not only can they get the vantage point of the serve coming in to kind of get that perceptual cognitive skill, like that read skill of the serve, they can also have a pretty good vantage point to provide that feedback. So if angle early is our cue, and what I mean by that is like being able to put your passing platform out in front of your body early and kind of trace it in the flight path of the serve, they'll have a good vantage point for that. And really this kind of has 2 benefits in the sense that they're getting the rep, like that perceptual rep right away, but then they just have a heightened awareness of applying that immediately. So, you know, if I'm watching, you know, Timmy in front of me performing that skill and I'm like, oh shoot, you know, Timmy either didn't do a good job or did a great job of angle early, then like when I go and do that rep, I'm already thinking about that, because I want to make sure that I look just as good, if not better than Timmy, but also like that's just something that is like on the forefront of like my attention. So then I'm able to focus on that process, but then I also have like that heightened knowledge of what the outcome is. So, if I'm focusing on angle early and, I kind of shank the pass a little bit more to my right, it's like, oh, okay, maybe I didn't get my angle out in the flight path early enough. And I actually just had it like beside my body. And like, that's why the ball went directly sideways. So again, like that autonomous learning is already occurring because these athletes are just primed on what they should be looking at. And again, allow them to answer the why and always refer back to cues. So this one, I'll kind of go over this a little more briefly because we'll also kind of explain it in the next part. If you have the ability, whether you're a team that is able to film practice, or I definitely suggest filming matches as well. Just provide that opportunity for athletes to watch video. Like we don't all have to be that coach who's fiending over video and on iMovie and cutting out highlights and stuff like that. Like if you just provide raw footage to your athletes, like the motivated ones and the ones that have a desire to get better are going to watch it. And even more if you're able to kind of narrow their focus on some skills that they should be paying attention to, then it's going to be beneficial to them. So that can be executed individually. So again, if you just don't have the means to, like if you're not a full-time coach, or if you're working a demanding job and you're the coach of that high school JV team, it's like maybe you just ask those athletes to do it on their own. And maybe you tell them to take notes and you'll refer back to those notes. But if you don't have the capacity, then just have them go individually. Better yet, if you're able to kind of piece them together in position groups, that's fantastic. Because then not only are they going through that process themselves, they're then able to exchange ideas, exchange information with their peers. And then kind of finally, the coach one-on-one, I think is fantastic as well. So if you have the capacity to, doing those one-on-one meetings are going to be really beneficial. But again, like similar to what I said earlier, just like fight that urge to be the one who's kind of dominating the conversation. Like rather than just tell them what they did wrong or what's happening, just ask them questions, ask them like, what did they see? Like, what did they feel happened? And always refer back to those cues. So there you go. We hit the 16-point mark. So our second technical timeout. So I can see kind of like from the quick notifications that I get that the chat is hopefully pretty hot. But Jay, how are things going over there?
Yeah, good. We're getting some really good conversation going in the chat right now and some questions. I'm just going to try and pull up poll number 2 and we'll get that going while we maybe start a conversation. I think it would be worthwhile maybe to just have a bit of a chat here, like about some strategies or maybe some opportunities you see for club coaches to use video. I think we're hearing a lot that club coaches see the benefit of it in practice to provide feedback and engage in observational learning, but just they're having troubles finding the time to do it or finding the right way to set up that iPad and then still run a practice, give feedback, manage players, and run video.
Yeah, and that's where I would say, like, kind of to what you just alluded to, is like just use the iPad, set up a tripod, and not trying to sound like an infomercial here, but just like set it and forget it. So maybe don't have it running for a full 2-hour practice, because that's just going to be like, the likelihood is that you're not going to have an athlete who finishes a 2-hour practice, goes home, and then watches every minute of that 2-hour practice. But maybe you just know that with your particular team that serve receive is just like your focal point of training, like improving in a certain cue of serve receive is going to be the objective for your practice. Like for those 10 minutes, just record that. So just as you're setting up the drill, set up the iPad, hit record, and then there's so many different platforms, whether you use like a Google Drive or Dropbox. So just provide those athletes that raw footage. Or if you want, like set aside some time either at the end of that practice or the beginning of the next practice to just like go over that footage. Again, like it's not going to take 2/3 of your practice. Like it's not going to take a significant amount of time. But again, like research is going to tell us that observational learning activates the same pathways as physical practice, as physical training. So if we're able to prime our athletes in that next training session, even with just like 4 or 5 minutes of video, then right away they're like, to use Timmy as the example, it's like, oh, like look what Timmy's doing. Like look at that angle early on that pass, and like, oh wow, that was a perfect pass. Like all of a sudden they're almost excited for what could be like that ensuing practice. So I would say it's like just be really aware of your realities, and like don't focus on like your constraints. Like just try to find creative solutions. So yeah, like maybe you have to pull yourself from providing like nonstop feedback from practice because you're on coach's eye on your phone, but like do it for 3-4 minutes. Like do it for a couple reps. Now all of a sudden you probably have a bank of 20 to 25 video clips that you're going to send to your athletes. Like I would say you can get a lot out of not spending a lot of time doing video.
Okay, awesome. And how would you say your practice design or activity design changes to help facilitate getting video feedback? Like I'm assuming that there's some activities that you found are pretty conducive to that versus maybe others that, you just don't have time to pull Johnny out and give him feedback.
Yeah, and that's where like a lot of, again, like to pull off what Charles was saying last night, like a lot of our activities, like we spend a lot more time in like a transfer or a gameplay phase in our practice. We're going to spend a little bit less time in tutorial. So what I mean by that is like tutorial is going to be more like blocked reps where we're isolating certain skills. But even like within tutorial and transfer, we're going to allow time where it's like it's not just one athlete getting like rapid fire like 15 reps in 2 minutes. Like we're going to allow them to maybe perform like 1 or 2 reps and then just like wave out of the drill to watch the video. And oftentimes, like as a coach, like depending on like where I feel our team is at and just like their understanding of our concepts, I might not even hang out by the TV. So if we're doing, again, I'm just gonna keep using passing because it's the easiest one. If we're doing a passing drill, like there's gonna be a serve that's coming in, the iPad is either gonna be like at an angle or behind the court, and the TV is gonna be kind of off on the sideline. So if there's a receiver who's in 5 who passes the ball, they're just gonna kind of wave out. The video delay is gonna be on like a 6-second delay. So they're just gonna like wave out, kind of watch the TV and then wave back in. And as they're coming by me, like I might just quickly ask them, like, oh, what'd you see? And they're going to refer back to our cues, and then like they're priming themselves for that next rep. Again, I don't always ask the question. If I feel like, if I trust that the athlete has a pretty good idea of our cues and our principles, then I'll kind of just like let them do their thing. If I feel like the activity is breaking down and there clearly isn't like that coupling of perception and action, then I'll probably step in and make sure that we're focused on the right things. But again, like it's all going to be about like the setup of the activity. And most of our activities, like even if we're working on a passing, like if it's a passing drill, like there's still going to be a serve, there's likely still going to be a set, probably still going to be an attack. Like we're even in our tutorial phase or like our block reps, we're still going to incorporate kind of like those game like scenarios.
Yeah, so I mean, how obviously you've got a team of, a bunch of different positions, bunch of different individuals that maybe have different areas of the skill. Let's use serve receive, for example, that they maybe need to focus on to have a better outcome and to continue to improve. So, how do you balance, what cues you're working on with individuals? How many cues do you maybe use? Does everyone work on the same cue? Like, walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so everyone on our team is going to work from like the same global cues and principles. So with serve reception, we're going to have 5 or 6, and they're going to go through kind of like the perceptual component of serve receiving, like the balance, the actual execution, and like our last one is stick it. It's probably my favorite one. It's just like how they finish the pass. But what we do to kind of make our collective activities a little bit more individual is that we have our athletes, like both like our coaching staff and our athletes kind of take a role in their, I call them the IIPs, so the individual improvement plans. I think some people call them IIPPs, so individual like progression plans. So again, if we're doing a passing drill and I think that our team, like as a collective, like as like left sides and liberos need to work on, like their reading ability and like that stick it, I'll kind of prime our team on those cues. But if you're someone who is actually just quite proficient in those 2 cues, but you need to work on like balance or like angle early, then because you've been involved in the process of creating that IIP, like what you need to work on. So like what I challenge our athletes is like, as a coach, I'm setting up a practice plan that's looking to address deficiencies of our team as a whole, like as a collective. But each individual is going to have like their own specific needs. So I need to make sure that they're aware that even if we're working on a specific component, that based on their skill level, their deficiencies, or even like what position they play, like they need to take it and run with it based on their needs.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's great. We'll ask one more here, Mike. How would you, back to, convincing athletes that this is a beneficial method? How are you managing athletes who just want to maybe rep? They just want to get more and more reps, but instead of maybe taking some time to watch themselves rep, because I'm sure that there's a bit of a sacrifice of, if we're using video in practice, then that maybe means we're touching the ball less.
Yeah, that's where I would just I would challenge them on the, quality over quantity question. And I think kind of initially, like, to be honest, I would say I have, like, it's less and less of an issue to convince athletes to use video feedback. Because I think, again, to use the kids these days cliche, like, I think athletes just want to see themselves performing skills. I think video is just how like our world functions. So I think already there's an appetite to seek out video feedback. But then, like, I've for sure coached athletes over the past few years that are just like rep monsters. Like, all they want is just like, give me that like rapid fire passing. I just want to like get those contacts. And that's where I would just, I would challenge them. So, some athletes are going to be for sure like I was, and a little bit more stubborn. It's just challenge them, like, sure, you're getting 100 passing reps, but like out of that 100, like really how many of those were actual quality? And how can you actually measure the success? Like, if you're only focusing on the outcome and the results, then you're just ignoring the process. And for sure, like, when we're incorporating like different mental performance concepts, whether it's like a growth mindset or again, just like that idea of like random versus blocked, it's like the process is going to be so key to what we do. So again, like, I would challenge them. It's like, how much are you focusing on the process, and like, are you solely focused on the result? Because if you are, then you're really not in a environment to learn. You're just looking to look really good in that moment. So again, I would say it's less of a challenge, just because I think athletes are like, there's just an appetite for video feedback, and also I would just kind of challenge them on that quality over quantity.
Awesome. All right, well, let's keep rolling here, Mike.
Cool. So the last part is going to be more of like pure application. So I'm going to have kind of two different scenarios, one from our team and one from another team that are still busy this summer. So obviously, like, this application is beneficial during any off season, but I would say during a global pandemic like we're currently in, observational learning is kind of like all you can do. So us as coaches, generally, we're always searching for ways to supplement training. Whether in the summer, it's like, so for us as post-secondary coaches, our athletes are at home from May until August, whether they live in Vancouver or like in Winnipeg or all the way in Australia. It's like, the fact of the matter is that they can't come into practice that often. So we're able to still, again, incorporate some level of training through observational learning. So similar to what I had said before about like the observational learning in season, it's like you can use the review of match video of yourself. And I think that's a really good activity or exercise to have a bit of a self-analysis, to understand what your deficiencies are, because you can look at video, you can watch yourself perform. And like, that's going to be, again, important for the athletes to come to like their own conclusions and kind of be their own facilitators of learning to determine what areas that they need to work on. So again, like, I'm going to use this very scenario as a really good example. It's like, even if your athletes are doing the match review individually, it's like, use platforms like Zoom, or I know a lot of teachers are using like Microsoft Team, and I'm sure there's a handful of other platforms that are really similar to this one. It's like, then just use creative like mechanisms to bring them together into positional groups, and then have that dialogue to engage in those conversations. Then kind of like to join positional groups with coach one-on-one. It's like, you can even do like a coach position group session. And that's going to be like my next example. So Tom Black, our the head coach of our senior women's national team, like I've had the privilege of getting a little bit of a peek behind the curtain with some of the activities that they're currently working on with their athletes. So Tom is a fantastic coach, and he's definitely cue and principles based. And this past summer, like his first summer last year in 2019, I know for a fact that he was really just hammering home like his cues and his principles with his athletes. Like they definitely had it like repeated, and it was something that was just like really entrenched in like everything that they did in training. So now like what Tom and their coaching staff have done this summer is he just does like positional group Zoom meetings. So I'll use kind of the example with their opposites. Like I know that Tom and their coaching staff sat down with their opposites, and Tom had put together like a sequence of videos. Like I think their meeting was 30, 45 minutes. So it was a sequence of videos of their attackers in different like offensive or defensive situations, and like really like all Tom did is he would just ask questions. So he's just playing the video. So like if we're using, I'll use a BC athlete, I'll use Kira Van Rijk as the example. So if Kira's attacking out of system, Tom will play the clip and then he'll kind of go back and replay it, maybe go slow motion. And the entire conversation is just asking questions. So it's Kira, with your approach, what happened here? And she's going to refer back to the cues. So she can be like, oh, my approach, it didn't go big, bigger, biggest, or it didn't go fast, faster, fastest, which is, some of the cues that they use, which is great. So immediately she has that error detection. So like step one, she's been able to identify like what it is that she did poorly in that situation. But then right away, Tom's going to ask like, why is that important? So she's attacking a ball out of system. Her approach wasn't as optimal as the coach would have liked or she would have liked. So yeah, it's like, okay, like why are those cues important? It's like, okay, well, if I'm not approaching with like a certain level of speed, then I'm not gonna be able to transfer that into vertical jump, which means like, I'm not gonna have the attack angle that I normally would. And like without that kind of speed of my approach, I'm not gonna have the same momentum to create the velocity that I want to. And since she'll have already seen kind of like the outcome of the attack, then she can answer the next question where it's like, okay, well then why are those important? Like why is getting vertical and like high pointing the ball, and why is having like kind of optimal velocity important? She's like, well, I need to be able to score against a well-formed double block. And if I don't kind of like, backpedaling a little bit, if you don't execute those skills, then you're not gonna be able to have the desired result. So again, I just kind of had like a peek behind the curtain on just that one position group, but I guarantee like all summer before they're able to get into training, Tom's just gonna be having like those like weekly or bi-weekly conversations with those position groups. So again, like that's the senior women's national team. They're going to have the resources of, a baseline view of their practices or all their matches. But I think like, again, if you're a club coach or a high school coach and you've been able to get some video on your team, it's like provide that to them. And again, like maybe you don't have the capacity to spend hours cutting video and like you probably don't have like a scout man or a scout woman being able to put those clips together. But it's like, just be aware of your reality and take that idea where it's, maybe you hop on a Zoom call with your athlete and you just go over film. It's like, hey, like, what happened and what went well and what didn't go well. And I'd say like far too often we kind of focus on what didn't go well, but like that detection of what went well and what led to success is also going to be kind of like that positive reinforcement that your athletes need. So again, like that's our senior women's national team. They were about to compete in Nations League for the first time in whether it was ever or in a long time. And, rather than seeing this as a really unfortunate situation, their coaching staff is making the most out of this opportunity. And now kind of to give an example of what we're currently doing with our guys. So last summer, again, knowing that we weren't going to have contact with most of our guys, I put together a bit of a mental performance summer series. So with myself and Ian Perry, our assistant coach, obviously our summer kind of changed pretty drastically. So I put together the mental performance quarantine series. So there's some activities that could allow us to level up even while we're not in training. So the first activity that we did, we just titled it Modeling After the Pros. So one thing I made pretty clear to our guys, and which I think should be clear to this group, is like pros doesn't just refer to the professionals, but they're the prototype. like they're the prototype that we're looking to model after, because obviously they're the most successful and most skilled athletes in our sport in the world. So what the activity was is we have the opportunity, like all of our matches are on a platform called Volumetrics. So, we're able to break down video. The guys can filter out different actions. So kind of step one to this activity was they just did an individual assessment of like their own deficiencies through self-analysis. So each athlete, I think I had them, identify like 5 different skills or different components of their skills. And then from that, they were supposed to find 3 international athletes that play their position, but then also like matched their like physical skill set. So like whether they were like receiving P2 or like a big attacking opposite. Like they were going to find a professional athlete that kind of fits kind of more of their style. So again, through Volumetrics' platform, we have access to all the teams that use that platform. So really fortunate for us, we have access to all the professional games in Italy and like the top division in Italy, which has most of the top international players competing in that league. So then once the guys did that, they would kind of create notes on, areas that they need improvement, like their deficiencies, and then they would look at athletes that were doing it kind of better than they were. So like the prototype that they could model afterwards. And then in like our next Zoom team meeting, we just used breakout rooms. So we just had like all of our opposites together, our left side, setters, middles, and liberos. And then they just presented on like A, what their deficiencies were, and then B, the athletes that they chose and like what those athletes did really well. So again, I'm going to use a nice BC boy on our team. So Mike Dehaniuk. So we talked about it earlier, like our receive to attack patterning and our different roadways and kind of like one of our core principles is going to be like making sure that we finish inside. So we're contacting the ball like inside the antenna. We kind of have like a list of reasons why we think that's important, just in terms of like creating different attack angles and being able to expose the block and the defense in certain ways. So that was for sure an area that we worked with Mikey kind of all season, but an area that he wanted to continue improving on. So here's kind of a still photo from one of our playoff matches against Winnipeg at the end of the season. So Mikey, he's a couple feet inside the antenna, does a pretty good job of high pointing. Obviously he's against a one-on-one, so this is a pretty advantageous situation. But he's able to look at this and understand like, okay, what attack angles were available to me, like what shot did I actually perform, and how much did I actually execute like those receive to attack principles or receive to attack cues that I should be referring to. And then using Aaron Russell, a left side with the Team USA, who also plays on Trentino, one of the top Italian teams and one of the top club teams in the world. He could just refer back to Aaron Russell. And it's like, okay, here's really talented, really physically gifted attacking left side. It's like, well, Aaron's about like another 3 or 4 feet inside. So he's probably a good 2 meters inside the court where he's contacting. And even against like a well-formed, or not, I shouldn't say well-formed, like a relatively formed double block. It's like Mikey could then assess, okay, like what attack angles were available to Aaron. So because Aaron was able to finish inside and high point, like he's able to like jump inside. I think that's Zaitsev, the Modena opposite, who's blocking. It's like he could jump inside Zaitsev and has the shot, into the seam. Probably doesn't have sharp cross here just because Modena's middle is kind of trailing. But if he really wanted to, Russell probably could turn it down the line. So Russell doesn't do a fantastic job of kind of finding the ball kind of exactly where he's a little bit more extended than he probably would have liked. But Mikey is able to use volumetrics, is able to use observational learning to just go kind of back and forth between video. So like watch some of his attacks, watch Aaron Russell or Taylor Sander or any number of like really talented left sides in the world. Mikey is able to use again like the resource that we're super fortunate to have to model after the pros and kind of model after the prototypes. So again, we're really lucky that we have this opportunity. I'm very well aware that most people don't have that luxury, but again, like be creative with what you can do. And kind of near the end of this talk here, I'll provide some resources. If you don't have access to volumetrics like we do, there's still some pretty cool resources that you guys can use to like direct your athletes to watching some professional volleyball. Kind of within, I'd say, all of this, like observational learning, whether it's in practice, in the off season, watching their own video or what have you, it's like just be aware of the benefits of the baseline view or the sideline view. So in general, I would always say watch from the baseline. So if you have the opportunity to watch an international game, you know, it's funny, like if you're watching, let's say like Team Canada is playing in Vancouver, like let's say they're playing at the Oval, it's like you'll find a lot of coaches watch from the baseline and a lot of fans will watch from the sideline. So from the baseline, you're able to get an idea of like the width of the play, but then also the height, like the verticality that these athletes are able to accomplish. And like that's going to tell you a lot of information that you really just wouldn't have from the sideline view. From the sideline view, you don't have that vantage point, that perception. But when it comes to your athletes, like what you want to be aware of is that you're looking to replicate the environment that they're going to be in a game. So again, like when they're playing, like they're coming from the baseline view, like they're not playing from the sideline. So when they're looking to transfer that skill from like perception into action, you want to replicate that environment as best as you can. So again, like when we're having our guys watch video, like our video is always from the baseline view. And if we're in, you know, 6-on-6 transfer activities in practice, we're always going to go from the baseline. And you know, if anything, we're going to try to go baseline, have like a little bit more height so they can have some vantage point on like what's happening on our side, but also what's happening on the other side. And the final piece, and I would say like I honestly still struggle with this, especially if I'm watching professional teams or professional athletes, like for my own benefit, is like train your athletes to watch like a coach and not a fan. Volleyball is like a really impressive sport to watch. Like it's a very powerful sport, and oftentimes like we'll just get caught watching the ball and then, you know, celebrate like the big kill or the big block. It's like, but what you really need to pay attention to is what's happening away from the ball. So training your athletes again through like narrowing their attentional focus onto one or two skills or one or two athletes, making sure that they're not just like taking in a volleyball game. So honestly, like even though we spend time training our own athletes in this area, sometimes when we're doing game plan, I'll have to kind of like jump on our guys a little bit if they're like celebrating like a big kill or a big block. If we're watching, you know, our upcoming opponent play someone else, like a previous opponent, like a lot of times guys will just like ooh and ah over a big kill or a big block. It's like we need to kind of like narrow that focus and making sure that they're paying attention to the particulars of like really what you're wanting them to get out of this observational learning. So these two things, like I haven't really spoken about them too much, but really are going to be key indicators for the transfer to perception into action. So just kind of wrapping things up. So obviously I've been talking for over an hour here. So threw a lot of research at you. Part one, looked to kind of bridge the gap between research and application in season in part two, and give you two examples of how the senior women's national team and how our men's volleyball team at UBC are using observational learning. But kind of the take-home message is, as I've said, it engages the same parts of the brain that physical training does. So it allows for skill development even when you're not getting that physical training, you're not getting those reps that I'm sure we all wish we could be right now. Variable observation is going to be the most effective. So understanding the need to watch both novice and expert, which helps in error detection, and understanding that that's going to be a sliding scale based on the skill level of your athletes. And again, the perceived competency is going to be important in that. And then in terms of observational learning within the season, please, if there's one thing you get from this presentation, it's like review how much autonomy you're providing your athletes. And again, like it's going to be based on the capacity of those athletes, but just engage them in the decision making and learning processes. That's going to allow them to be more motivated, more engaged in their process and their development. For sure, look to like reflect on like what cues you use, like what feedback you provide, and like really what you're looking to do on top of creating external cues is use cues that can be like easily repeatable. So like by you, like verbally repeatable. So rather than consistently changing like how you're giving feedback on a forum pass, like kind of have your guiding cues and then just like refer back to those. because that consistency is going to allow your athletes to have, I guess, like a heightened awareness of like what it is that you're actually asking them to do. So you're kind of making sure that there isn't that assumption that they know what you're talking about. Like you just kind of have like that blueprint as we were talking about. And again, looking to pair both verbal and visual feedback. And based on your reality, based on your capacity as a coach and your environment and the level that you're coaching at, just find creative ways for video feedback. I guess last but not least, peer observation. And then finally, in the off season, big piece is going to be taking the time to allow your athletes to go through some form of self-analysis, and based on like what resources you have, modeling after the pros, the professionals and the prototypes. So a little bit of a shameless plug here. So you can watch all the UBC men's volleyball games. So good chunk of our preseason, all of our regular season and playoff games are on our YouTube channel. There's a coach, Yuri Bolchev. I think he's a Russian coach. This is fantastic, honestly. So last time I visited his page, I don't think he had any professional games from this year or even any games from like the end of summer 2019. But all his videos are from the baseline, and he cuts out all the dead time. So you can watch an entire match in like 20 minutes. So you get the baseline view. You just get the rallies. I actually think he might cut out missed serves too. But there's no dead time between timeouts, set breaks, points between serves. So the awesome thing about Yuri's page, it has both international men's and women's. So you can get both genders there. FIVB's YouTube page, same thing. They've got both men's and women's. And I know it's clearly been an initiative during COVID that they've just been posting more and more videos and replaying. Like I think they had the VNL finals are going on right now on the men's side. So I think they had, maybe wasn't this year, maybe it was a previous year, but they kind of like France's road to their most recent VNL championship. So all those videos are on YouTube. And I know that they've done the same with some women's world championships, I think, and then also some professional leagues. During the summer, when we have a regular summer with volleyball, also using the Volleyball World, I definitely advise you to subscribe. Like it seems, initially like a bit of a tough pill to swallow to drop, $30 US for a subscription, but you get a subscription for the full year, and you're honestly getting like more volleyball than you can probably handle. So whether it's VNL, you're getting all the matches from all the pools every single weekend, both genders, but then they're also going to do other FIVB events like the World Championships, Club World Cups, and then also like International World Cups on both genders. And then last but not least, just Loyola One TV. So I know when I was playing, when I first started coaching, Loyola was kind of like the be all end all. I definitely used that resource as well. So I'm sure we probably had the question that Jay throws these links into the chat or what have you. Kind of to this last, if people have any questions, like whether it's other resources that we use or any questions that we have around whether it's observational learning, our development of our cues, like our implementation of those cues, honestly, like don't hesitate to shoot me a message. Like I said, like as much as I've been the talking head here for over like an hour, I want to engage in conversations with other coaches. Like I know I've found the first two presentations of this webinar series really useful, like both Shane and Charles' presentations. I think no matter what level you are, whether you're a young buck like me, a 30-year-old coach, or someone who's been coaching for 30 years, or 35, I think in Charles' case, I think we're all wanting to be avid learners, and I think we can all always be learning from each other. So I please invite you guys to contact me via email. And if you want any kind of information on our team, again, kind of shameless plug, there's the different medias that you can check out for us with UBC men's volleyball. That's all I got for you, Jay.
Awesome, Mike. Thanks. We'll spend a couple minutes here answering a few questions. If there are anything that comes up that you want Mike to discuss on, just please use the Q&A function right now. We won't do another poll. One question that came up was, not every single player on the team is going to have in-match video, right? You probably only have, 7 to 10 guys that get the majority of playing time or girls. So what are you doing for those athletes that maybe aren't getting as much playing time, and how are you maybe giving them opportunities to get video feedback?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you asked this question because I was thinking about this earlier. 'Cause I was talking about like watching your own individual video. It's like, well, what's like, at least like in post-secondary teams, it's like there's gonna be some guys who probably just don't play a ton throughout the season. Like you might have some exhibition video or some chances for them to have some roles like a sub or a double sub, but they don't always engage in all the skills. That's where I would say like the positional groups are going to be important. So then, I find with our positional groups, they have like the dialogue is less about like, oh, like Ben Hooker, like this is how you set. Like our setters will talk about like collectively, this is how our team wants to set. So they're almost able to like dissociate like the individual a little bit, and it's like it's their team within the team, like it's their group within our team. So I find like even though they're not watching themselves, like they're still looking for that error detection that like we're really wanting to get out of this observational learning, whether it's error detection or again detecting like that positive skill execution.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder if it maybe even is beneficial for someone to observe someone else, right? Like maybe you're coming in with some preconceived notions, or maybe you're having challenges watching yourself on video. Do you think it could be beneficial watching, again, someone appear on video and trying to go through that error detection correction?
Yeah. And I think like to that point, like it's kind of natural. Everybody's going to be protective of their own ego. So even when you're watching yourself make errors, you're probably going to like soften the blow a little bit with yourself, because you're going to be like, oh yeah, well, I missed that set. Well, the pass wasn't very good. Maybe our attacker could have done this. Like there's always ways that you can kind of protect the ego in that sense. But if you're watching someone else, you're going to be looking a little bit more objectively. And I think again, like what you're really wanting to do is just prime the motor pathways on again, coupling the perception and action. So if you're detecting someone else's error or someone else's positive skill execution, then like that objective view could probably be beneficial.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, unless we have any kind of last minute questions here, I think we'll wrap up there. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We've got 2 more presentations coming up this week. Tomorrow evening, we have Ryan and Carol Hofer presenting on a games-based approach to training. And on Friday, we will have Julie Young, who will be presenting on developing a high-performance mindset. Got a few people asking questions about just the PD points that we've able to associate with the series. We'll be submitting a list of those who attended on the Zoom webinar to the locker, and that will show up as an event in your locker at a later point. So nothing that you need to do directly to submit for those points. Thanks again, everyone, for coming in. Mike, thanks a ton. Got a lot of notes down, and definitely really cool to hear your experience with observational learning and learn a little bit more about maybe some of the theory behind it. So thanks, Mike.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, awesome. Stay safe, everyone, and we'll talk to you tomorrow night. Bye.